Hey friends, welcome back to Hot News. It's a glorious Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Everything is the way that it should be. I'm sitting here on the Hot News couch. Reece is behind the Hot News camera, and everybody is getting what they want with Hot News today. And we're going to talk about that after we talk about today's video sponsor, which is going to happen to be Displate. Look at these dope, gorgeous metal prints, my friends. You got Goku, you got Cyberpunk. They got the license from CD Projekt Red. You now have gorgeous Cyberpunk 2077 metal prints, and for every print that you buy, they plant 10 trees. And if you use the link and the offer code in the video description, we get a kickback, but you save 15% off of your purchase. It's amazing. So you should totally use all of the things down below. Code UFD, save 15%. And they usually run other sales from time to time, but make sure to use the link in the video description if you wouldn't so mind. Thank you. Okay, friends, now let's go ahead and cover a few things that are going on in the world of AMD. Specifically, Mercury Research has finally published its CPU findings of Q2 2019. They actually supposedly released this 9 days ago, but now it's just finally making it to the internet. Tom's Hardware is the first website that I can find that has the Mercury Research report on it. Only for AMD CPUs, which is weird. And when I tried to find myself how I could get more Mercury Research CPU sales statistics, apparently Mercury Research charges $9,495 for one license to that data. So it's not going to happen that we're going to be able to purchase it. And unfortunately, it looks like only one website is actually publishing all of this data out there right now. But there are some interesting facts in Mercury Research's data for the CPU market share. And there's a couple other things that are used to, manage and show market share, such as Steam hardware surveys and a few other things. But there's usually flaws with those that are around, such as the Steam hardware survey controversy that was talked about a few weeks ago, which is that for every time somebody at an internet cafe boots up the PC and runs the Steam hardware survey, that counts as one user. So let's say that the most prevalent computer setup in a Chinese internet cafe is an Intel CPU with an NVIDIA GPU. Well, they're getting registered hundreds of times, probably per month, and that makes it so that it looks like AMD actually has a deflated market share. So Mercury Research has actually been doing this for quite some time, and it seems like they're a pretty reliable source and not just sales data. And when it comes to Q2 2019, which is the latest information we have since we're still technically in Q3, AMD sold no more in terms of market share. Obviously, it's not exact sales figures, but their market share remains flat from the first quarter of 2019, coming in with 17.1% of the overall CPU market share, which is kind of disappointing. However, there are some explanations behind it. One is that Intel didn't dominate the scene in Q2 because of their CPU shortages. They have supposed to have been moved on to 10 nanometers, but they've been stuck on 14 nanometers. And so they're running out of places to actually produce 14 nanometer things, which means that CPU shortages have been running rampant for quite some time. Then secondly, as you could probably guess, a lot of people were actually holding off on buying Ryzen 2000 chips until Ryzen 3000 came out, which could account for the fact that there is no increase from quarter to quarter for AMD's CPU market share. However, year over year from Q2 of last year, they're up nearly 5%. So they're not doing too bad. However, one of the interesting things that I found while researching this was AMD's market share from 10 years ago. So Q2 2009, and what we found is that they are down 10%, not 10 percentage points, but 10%. So in Q2 of 2009, they had 18.7% of the CPU market share. And now 10 years later, they have 17.1% after doubling within the last 2 years. As you can see, based on this chart right here, AMD was 9.1% in Q3 of 2016. So they made a resurgence, and they were at the bottom of the barrel when Ryzen actually launched, but it doesn't look like they're necessarily taking over. However, it doesn't take into consideration Ryzen 3000 at this point. But there is some indication, some weird indication, that Ryzen 3000 may not be the reason why AMD would have increased market share. Part of that success would be better Ryzen 2000 sales, because if we go on over to Amazon's best-selling CPU processors, what we find is that the best-selling processor is the Ryzen 5 2600. not a Ryzen 3000. Then you have something like the Ryzen 9 3900X coming in second place, but the issue with that is that there's been a worldwide shortage, and Amazon just got stock of those yesterday. They were selling for $500. I was this close to buying one, but now they're out of stock again. Worldwide shortage of the 12-core CPU, so the sale market share percentage can't go up too much because of that. And then if we just look at the rest of the top 8 CPUs, we have 4 Ryzen 2000 based CPUs in the top 8. You have 2 Ryzen 3000s, the 3900X and the 3600, and then the other 2 are the 9700K and the 9900K. Obviously, Amazon's sales data is not the world. This is just US sales data, and it's not exactly science. Like I mentioned before, there can be complications with this, especially with things like Steam hardware survey. So it looks like the reason people are buying Ryzen 2000 is because of the lower prices, thanks to Ryzen 3000. You know, they just lowered the price on the older processors, and they're a good enough value that it makes sense to purchase them. However, there is also another indication that Ryzen 2000 might not have been as bad as what we thought, because Silicon Lottery actually just published their information on the binning of the Ryzen 3000 chips. They have the report of the Matisse overclockability. So what they actually found was that if you pick up a Ryzen 7 3700X, to get 4.1 gigahertz on all cores, that's the top 74% of chips. However, to get 4.15, not even 4.2, you're looking at the top 21% of chips. But if we go back to the 2700X, 4.15 gigahertz was achieved by the top 67% of chips. So the frequency was actually slightly better on the 2700X when it came to binning. And then for 4.2 gigahertz, 32% of those chips could hit 4.2 gigahertz. So the 2700X had a better 4.2 gigahertz overclock than the 3700X. But one thing to consider is that with the 2000 series, the 2700X was the top tier flagship Ryzen 7 processor, whereas the 3700X is actually the baseline, and the 3800X is now the flagship. And if we take a look at the 3800X, what we find is that all of them, 100% of the CPUs tested, can hit 4.2 gigahertz there. 4.25 is the top 53%, and 4.3 gigahertz is the top 20%. So there is some better overclockability, but you're paying for that considering the 3800X costs $400 versus the 3700X $320. Then if you care at all about the 12-core CPU, to hit 4.1 gigahertz, that's the top 68%, and 4.2 gigahertz is the top 6%. So overclocking, it looks like AMD is giving us the best things out of the box. There's not a whole lot of headroom with these chips, but thanks to the IPC improvements, they're actually really competitive, and it's not a frequency thing. So, I mean, AMD is doing their best, but it also looks like if you care at all about frequency, sometimes just buying what's cheaper might work. Getting a $200 2700X versus a $320 3700X could be a better bet if you just need that pure clock speed. You need 4.2 gigahertz for whatever reason. But even though, so going back to the market share thing, even though AMD's CPU sales have remained flat, one of the things that probably isn't concerning them is the fact that this isn't going to make up the majority of the sales that they're looking at, because I just want to break it down for you. If we look at console versus PC sales, PC was 25% of the global revenue in 2018, and consoles were 28%. So consoles make more money. And then if we just looked at the breakdown of consoles by market share, Xbox is 65% in the last year in North America. PlayStation's 35%. So that's nearly 100%. And Nintendo is 1% of the console operating system market in 2019. AMD has 99% of the console market with their SoCs, and with the PlayStation 5 and Project Scarlet coming out next year, that's going to continue to increase. So even though the sales might be flat on the regular CPUs, they're not necessarily struggling overall. But there's also more information about other market shares, such as server market. AMD is actually up 0.5% in the server market from quarter to quarter and 2% year on year. And then in the mobile unit, they're up 1% quarter on quarter and 5% year on year, which is pretty good. And considering the fact that AMD Epic Rome was just announced last week, and all of the reviews that have been coming out say that it is probably one of the best chips AMD has ever made, and it can compete with Intel Xeon server chips in many of the high core count areas where it really matters, and things like its AVX 512 instruction is actually really freaking good, and all of the reviews are saying it's a clear winner. It does look like they're going to be able to wrestle some more of that server market share from Intel in the coming months, and that way probably Q3 is going to be a huge increase in market share both on CPU, desktop, as well as server environments for AMD. And on top of that, there's also been information coming out about Ryzen Threadripper 3000 series. There's been some leaked Geekbench scores, which showed that it can be up to 35% faster than the current Ryzen Threadripper 2990WX. That's the 32-core, 64-thread chip, and it's significantly faster in single-core performance over the best single-core Threadripper that's out there. Considering the prices that might come out, it could be really good. And then also, it looks like AMD is going to be giving these chips 144 megabytes of total cache with 128 megabytes of L3 cache, which could allow them to actually be pretty decent for gaming, like actually decent gaming Threadripper chips that are huge in core count, and you could just kind of create a virtual machine that has a gaming system and then also a render system, or like you could have 20 cores plus 8 cores, and then you reserve 4 cores for whatever else you're doing. Like, you could create insane systems with these Threadripper chips that are coming out, and the benchmarks are indicating that it is pretty phenomenal. And then also talking about the mobile environment, we mentioned in yesterday's hot news over on the UFD Tech channel about how AMD is going to be coming out with the Renoir APUs, and that's going to have Zen 2 CPU with Vega graphics. But it also looks like AMD's not done with Picasso APUs, with there being a Geekbench listing for the Ryzen 5 3550U, which is a 15-watt chip, and it's going to have Vega 9 graphics with the Zen Plus CPU. So AMD still not necessarily losing out a whole lot, but it does look like the wait for Ryzen 3000 kind of put their market share in a bit of a lackluster position. So the summation of this is AMD's in a really strong position to take over in Q3, but the previous sales data doesn't necessarily indicate that that's so. And obviously there was the Q2 earnings call by Lisa Su, which indicated that everything is kind of all right in that Q3. They're not actually expecting that much of a revenue increase, but we'll have to see what it looks like when those statistics come out. And then as far as the graphics side of things, apparently Mercury Research will come out with that on August 22nd, so we can wait till next week before they publish that, and then we have to wait for other websites who've paid the $5,000 subscription to come out with that at some point. All right, well, anyways, that's going to wrap up this episode of Hot News. What do you think about AMD's market share positioning? Does this seem to indicate with what you've been hearing around the pipeline? From what I know about talking to retailers, this is pretty much on point. The wait for Ryzen 3000 stymied a lot of sales right before it came out, and it looks like it could potentially lead to increased market share in Q3, but we'll find out in just a few months. So don't forget to check out our sponsor today, it's Displate. Go to displate.com/UFD Tech Official. Get dope metal prints. They're amazing. Also, hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode of Hot News. We tried something slightly different. Let me know if you noticed or cared. Anyways, type below what you think in the comments. Get subscribed to stay up to date on our news-related content. I'm Brett with the Hot News channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see your smiling face again in the next video. Bye.